Welcome in Ajit Pai. Hello, sir.
Hi, thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you. First of all, let me start at the end here and work our way backwards, perhaps. They at the FCC on Friday, I'd like to think under pressure. I don't know, because I don't think there was that much pressure from most of the media, which I consider to be liberal, and I was kind of surprised about that. They said, okay, this whole thing is off. We're not going to send people into the newsrooms around the country to talk with editors and people who select the news stories and the coverage and all that. But is it really off?
So I don't think it's off. It's suspended. And the way I like to think about it is as you would think about a baseball game being suspended.
Rain delay, right?
Exactly. It's not being canceled. It could come back. And the good thing is that the FCC has said that any study along these lines will not involve government researchers going into newsrooms and asking questions about a perceived station bias or how they decide to cover certain stories and not others, whether they're covering the critical information needs that people need to know. But nonetheless, we need to remain vigilant to make sure that any future study doesn't intrude on that core constitutional freedom of the press. All
right. Well, how did all of this come about? I mean, what led them to think that they could go into newsrooms? Now, and maybe, again, I'm just going out of order here because I have so many questions, but, you know, if they wanted to say, well, we renew licenses and we have a right to do what we want to do, I disagree vehemently. But newspapers, they don't have anything to do with newspapers, and they were going to go in there.
Right. So the hook for this whole study was a provision of the law that requires the FCC to report to Congress every 3 years on barriers that entrepreneurs and small businesses face when they're trying to get into the communications industry and the broadcasting business in particular. And as I looked over the study design, it seemed to me that some of the questions and some of the purposes had nothing to do with that report. I mean, asking, trying to figure out what a station's perceived bias is, or whether reporters have been told by management not to cover certain stories. I mean, that has nothing to do with barriers to entry, and that's one of the reasons why I got a little bit concerned, and especially because this was an initiative that none of us voted on. This wasn't decided by a vote of all the commissioners, and I thought it was important to bring public awareness to this issue, which is why I wrote the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on February 10th.
Right. Okay. So if it wasn't done by a vote, then who was it? Whose idea was it?
So under the agency's rules, the commissioners don't get to vote on things like entering into contracts or designing studies like this. Those issues are typically handled by the chairman's office, and we don't get input into them. And I think that if, as a general matter, more things like this were put to a vote, you would see a little more accountability, and hopefully controversies like this could be avoided altogether.
Yeah, no, that would certainly be nice. All right, so we still don't know. I mean, even in this rain delay, once play resumes, to go with the baseball jargon here, once play resumes, are you fully convinced that they have scrapped the idea of going into the newsrooms and doing what they said they would do? I mean, has that player been ejected from the game?
That's well, certainly one would hope so, and that's what they put out in the statement on Friday. And but as I've said before, the devil's going to be in the details. And if they decide to go ahead with this study, you can rest assured that I'll be watching to make sure that nothing like this is attempted again.
Or you'll let us know. Now, of course, is it possible that you wouldn't know because it's not, like you said, you guys don't have a vote? I mean, could the chairman just go ahead and delegate people to do what he wants them to do without actually telling you?
Well, one of the good things I think about the dialogue that's happened over the last couple of weeks is that the public's attention has really been drawn to this. I've heard from folks from across the nation and from, frankly, across the ideological spectrum who don't like this idea. We've heard a lot from Congress, including from House Republicans who sent a letter back in December expressing their own concerns. And so I think there's a lot of attention drawn to this, which is a good thing going forward. And I think that we're not going to be adopting any studies in a vacuum. There's going to be public accountability.
Yeah, no, that is a very good thing. All right, so but at the crux here, Byron York wrote a piece today in the at the Washington Examiner, actually at the Examiner. They linked it on FoxNews.com, talking about how this is all about minority ownership. And making sure there's more minority ownership. And people like James Claiborne, Congressman, of course, powerful House Democrat, has been a big-time advocate of more minority ownership in the media. Is there a role for the FCC to play with that? Can they start denying licenses, renewals to people because they will then give it to, a minority group who might come forward and say we got to have some kind of quota system?
Well, to be honest, we're not quite sure what the underlying motivation for this was. All we know is that what we see on paper, and that is that the stated purpose of this was to inform a report that the FCC was required to send to Congress. And if there is a goal of influencing minority ownership numbers, I myself have put out a number of what I consider to be legally permissible and smart ideas, such as increasing access to capital for minority broadcasters who want to get into the business. But what we shouldn't do is adopt studies like this if they don't have anything to do with a core FCC function, and we should keep the two things separate, I think.
Ajit, let me ask you this: has there been any talk about, within the FCC that you've heard over the last number of years about the fairness doctrine, bringing it back, a desire to do so, or as I viewed this study as it was originally proposed, I thought it was an end around Congress, like the president's become so good at doing, to try to get some kind of fairness doctrine in there without having Congress pass one, because they know they can't. But have you heard the words fairness doctrine bandied about at all?
Well, the good news is that I have not. The FCC removed the Fairness Doctrine from its books officially in 2011. They'd announced back in 1987 that they weren't going to enforce it. But one of the reasons why I think it's important for folks to pay attention to what the agency is doing is precisely because the motivation that informed the Fairness Doctrine also, one could argue, informed the Sin study, having the government go in and just to make sure that broadcasters are covering the stories that the government thinks are important. Well, that's essentially, a cousin, if you will, to the Fairness Doctrine, and every time that motivation shows itself in an FCC initiative, I think it's important for the American people to make their voices heard.
All right. Well, one other question for you, or maybe one or two, and I appreciate your time. Bias in the media. Now, you say you've heard from both sides of the political spectrum on this. I didn't see the outrage from the leftist media that I saw from people on the right, and conservative media certainly, and the pundits. I didn't see that either. Maybe they don't. The ends justifies the means to them if they think they're going to get more minority ownership. I don't know. But how do you see a media bias? Do you see a double standard? Do you see people's careers ending because they said something if they're on the right, but if they're on the left, it's either ignored or? I mean, look at the outrage here with Ted Nugent, who said a disgusting thing and has apologized for it. But, I could point to Erin Burnett, for instance, has him on tonight on CNN, and she called George W. Bush a monkey when he was the president in 2007. I've played the sound of that. Michelle Obama brought Common to the White House, a rapper who talks about shooting cops and burning George W. Bush. Bill Maher has said horrific things on TV, granted not over the air, about conservative women using the C word. But the media, and the reason I bring it back to you is the media coverage of Ted Nugent, you would have thought nobody has ever said anything about a president or done anything disgusting except for Ted Nugent. And of course, they're after him because he was with the Republican candidate for governor in Texas. Are you as aware of the media bias as I am?
Certainly I hope there is not a double standard of the type you're describing. Having grown up in Kansas in the late 70s and early 80s, I think of myself as pretty temperate when it comes to political discourse, and I've certainly seen, lack of civility, which certainly did not start in 2009, I can tell you. And
oh, yeah.
One of the things I certainly hope is that we all agree that, whatever the freedom of speech means just that people are able to speak out without fear of repercussion, certainly from the government. And if that is ever threatened on either side, I hope Americans, even if they disagree with the comments that are made, will at least stand up for the freedom of those people to make them.
Yeah, listen, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time, and again, congratulations, and I know you will, keep us informed if that rain delay ends and they resume play as per normal. Please let us know.
Thank you, sir. Will do.
All right. Thank you very much. That's Ajit Pai, one of 4 commissioners for the Federal Communications Commission, or as Howard Cosell might call it, since we're doing sports here, the FCC. Well, you're still there. Good. I'm glad we got your laugh in there. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right.